Hello everyone, welcome back to the second tutorial of Introduction to Arduino IoT and Simulation. Now in this tutorial I am going to explain some basic features of the microcontroller. Okay. Now the first thing is IO operation of microcontroller. Now IO stand for input output operation. Okay. Now what is mean by input output operation? Here I am taking one example of 8051 microcontroller, which is in the syllabus of third year of engineering in Mumbai University. So 8051 microcontroller is having basically 40 pins, and out of these 40 pins we can use 32 pins as a input output pin. Okay, so first what is meant by input and output operation of microcontroller? Suppose we are having this microcontroller and we want to read temperature of the environment. Okay, so for that purpose we require temperature sensor. Okay, so for that purpose we have to connect this temperature sensor to the microcontroller. Now this temperature sensor will give data to the microcontroller. Now this is called as input operation. Okay, now after reading that particular data, obviously we have to write one program for reading that particular data, for processing that particular data. Okay, now after reading that particular data, suppose you have to display that particular data on some display device. Okay, so for that purpose again you have to connect one display device to the microcontroller. Now that is called as output operation, because microcontroller is going to send this data to the display device. Okay, so this is called as output operation. Okay, now whenever we design basically certain embedded systems or some projects related to the microcontroller, then in that case this input and output operation is very important. Okay, so every student should understand what is meant by input operation and what is meant by output operation. So the concept is very simple. Whenever we are taking data inside microcontroller, that is called as input operation. Okay, and whenever we are sending data from microcontroller to the outside device, it is called as output operation. Now that outside device may be display, may be some Wi-Fi module, may be Bluetooth device or anything. Okay, so whenever our data is going from microcontroller to the outside device, it may be any device. Okay, it is called as output device. And whenever we are reading data inside the microcontroller, that is called as input operation. Okay, so please remember this thing. Now here I am taking example of 8051 microcontroller. Now this 8051 microcontroller, I am going to explain some features of 8051 microcontroller. It is having 4 kilobytes of internal ROM memory. Then it is having 128 bytes of RAM memory. Then it is having 4 8-bit IO ports. Now what is mean by IO ports? IO stand for input output ports. Okay. Now it is having 4 8-bit IO ports. IO ports 4, we are having 4 IO ports: port 0, port 1, port 2 and port 3, that is P0, P1, P2 and P3. Okay, now all these 4 ports are 8-bit. Okay, so in 8051 microcontroller every port is having 8 pins. Okay, so total we are having 32 pins, we can say, or GPIO pins. GPIO stand for general purpose input output pins. Okay, now we can use only these 32 pins for interfacing these display devices or sensors. Okay, so whenever you want to design, you want to interface any devices like display device, LED, motor, stepper motor or sensors, then you must have to interface these devices to these GPIO pins only. So please remember one thing: whenever you are working on any microcontroller, in that case you should understand the pin diagram and you should understand how many GPIO pins are there. Okay, and you can connect devices to these GPIO pins only. Okay, now this 8051 microcontroller is having 40 pins. Out of these 40 pins we can use only 32 pins. Please remember this thing. Here I am giving just one example of microcontroller. Okay, now it is having 4 kilobytes of internal ROM memory. ROM memory is a memory where we normally store program. So for example, suppose you want to read this temperature sensor data and you want to display it on one display device, then for that purpose you have to write one program and you have to put, or you have to store this program inside this microcontroller's ROM memory. So please remember one thing, it is very important. In microcontroller, program is always stored inside the ROM memory, that is read only memory. Okay, and it is having 128 bytes of internal RAM memory. RAM memory stands for random access memory. Okay, now this RAM memory is used to store this temporary data. What is meant by temporary data? Suppose you are processing certain things, like here I am reading this sensor data and then I am displaying this sensor data on the display device. So in between this particular operation, suppose you want to temporarily store this data inside the memory, then that data is temporarily stored into the RAM memory. Okay, and in RAM memory, RAM is it never store data permanently. Okay, RAM is temporary memory. Okay, so whenever we start our system, at that time RAM memory store data temporarily, and whenever we switch off our system, then all the data inside the RAM memory is permanently deleted. Okay, but in ROM memory, whenever we store data, it is permanent. Okay, so it is basically a fixed or permanent data. Whenever we turn off the system, still that particular data or a particular program is always stored into the ROM memory. Okay, so ROM memory store the program basically, and RAM basically process the data. For example, in our mobile phone we are having internal memory and RAM memory. Okay, so whenever we open applications in our mobile phone, at that time all the application related data is normally stored into the RAM memory. So that's why if we open number of applications, suppose if we open 10 or 20 applications, then based on that application our processing speed gets slower. Why? Because there is a limited RAM memory inside our system. Okay, and whenever we turn off our mobile phone, for example, if we open 5 applications in our mobile phone, and if after opening 5 applications, if we turn off the mobile phone, then all the data related to that particular applications will be deleted. And whenever you again restart your mobile phone, you will not see that 5 applications in open condition. Why? Because RAM never store data permanently, it store data temporarily. Whenever you are opening any application, WhatsApp, or whenever you are playing some game, then temporary data is stored into the RAM memory. Okay, and ROM memory always it is permanent data. So whatever program or whatever operating system we store, it is always stored into the ROM memory. Okay, and IO ports means we can connect different devices to these ports only. Okay, so please remember this thing. Whenever you are learning any microcontroller, then it is important to understand the IO ports or IO pins, and we must have to connect these sensor devices or display devices to these pins only. Okay, the next feature is it is having 16-bit timer or counter. Now timer counter is a different thing. It is basically used to generate certain known delays or to count some external events. Okay, and it is having one serial interface for serial communication. So this is microcontroller block diagram we have already studied. Okay, and in this slide I basically explain the basics of 8051 microcontroller, and as well as the basic concepts of IO operation. Okay, so here is pin diagram of this 8051 microcontroller. So it is having 4 ports: port 0, port 1, port 2, and port 3. Okay, so whenever you want to interface devices or sensors, you must have to connect to these 4 ports only. You cannot connect devices or sensors to this ground or crystal pins. Please remember this thing. You cannot connect or you cannot interface. Okay, you cannot interface devices to the reset pin. You cannot interface devices to this particular 3 pins. Okay, so please remember this thing. Whenever you get microcontroller, any microcontroller, at that time you should understand this pin diagram. Okay, this is related to 8051 microcontroller, and based on this pin diagram you will get GPIO pins, and based on that GPIO pins you can interface devices or sensors to the microcontroller. Okay, now what is meant by embedded system? Basically embedded system, I'm just giving one simple introduction to the embedded system. So whenever we interface devices to the microcontroller to design certain application, then that application can be called as embedded system. Okay, for example, if we talk about washing machine in our daily use, if we talk about washing machine is again having some advanced washing machines are having microcontroller. We give input through the push buttons, and then based on that microcontroller work, and based on that washing machine basically work. Okay, for example, washing or drying operation is normally performed. So in that case we normally interface push buttons, then few sensors and actuator is nothing but motor is in rotating condition. Okay, another example is electric oven. Okay, so in electric oven we normally process the food or heat the food, okay, or cook the food, sorry. So for cooking purpose we select different menu, or we select different timing operation, and based on that the electric oven basically work. Okay, so there also a small embedded system is there where some sensors are interfaced, some input devices are interfaced, and then based on that it normally performs certain operations. Okay. Now here is example of one small embedded system. So here we are having microcontroller, then we are having GPS receiver. Now please remember this thing, GPS receiver is acting as an input device because it is giving signal or data to the microcontroller. Okay. Then we are having LCD. On this LCD we are displaying certain data, so it is output operation. Then again we are having some keypad, so keypad is giving data to the microcontroller, because through keypad we are giving input to the microcontroller, so it is again input device. Okay, then we are having output device, we are having voice recorder, audio amplifier, and speaker or headset. Okay, and then memory. From memory we are reading data, so that's why it is called as input operation. Okay, so here just a basic block diagram of the embedded system where we are having certain components which are interfaced to the microcontroller. Okay, so in this tutorial we learned the input output operation of microcontroller and introduction to the embedded system. So please remember this thing. Embedded system is nothing but small system where we are having certain devices which are interfaced to the microcontroller, and microcontroller normally work according to the program or according to the instructions given to the microcontroller. Okay, thank you.